Before streets, subways, and storefronts defined Midwood, Brooklyn, the land was quiet, open, and deeply natural. The name itself comes from a Dutch phrase meaning middle woods, a clue to what once stood here: dense forests stretching between scattered clearings. Native Lenape people moved through the area, hunting, fishing, and following seasonal rhythms. Later, Dutch settlers transformed parts of the land into farmland, growing crops and raising livestock. Dirt paths replaced forest trails, but the pace remained slow. For centuries, this was not a city at all, but a rural landscape shaped by nature and simple survival. European settlement in Midwood, Brooklyn began in the mid-1600s, when Dutch colonists moved into what was then part of the colony of New Netherland. Around the 1650s, they established small farming communities, carving homes and fields out of the wooded land. These settlers were among the first Europeans to live in central Brooklyn, long before it became part of a major city. Life was simple and agricultural, with families relying on the land and each other, laying the foundation for the neighborhood that would slowly evolve over the centuries. In the earliest days of Brooklyn, Midwood, Brooklyn was not a separate neighborhood at all, but part of a larger rural town known as Flatbush. It sat inland, away from the busy waterfront villages like Brooklyn Heights, and functioned as quiet farmland that supported the region. Flatbush was one of the central agricultural hubs of early Brooklyn, and Midwood's fields contributed to feeding the growing colonial population. While coastal areas handled trade and shipping, Midwood played a quieter but essential role, producing crops, sustaining families, and anchoring the inland economy. So in early Brooklyn, Midwood wasn't a destination. It was part of the backbone. A place of farms, open land, and slow rhythms, helping support the development of everything around it. In the early days of Midwood, Brooklyn, the land was divided into large Dutch-owned farms rather than grand estates. Families like the Cortelios, Vanderbilts, and Lott family held significant tracts of land, cultivating crops, raising livestock, and passing property down through generations. One of the most notable surviving remnants is the Hendrik Veit Lott House, a rare example of the kind of farmhouse that once dotted the area. These were not luxurious estates, but practical, working homesteads, built for agriculture and family life. Much of what is now Midwood was part of the larger farming lands of nearby Flatbush, where open fields stretched for miles. Over time, as Brooklyn expanded, these farms were gradually subdivided and developed, erasing most physical traces, but leaving their imprint in the neighborhood's layout and history. During the American Revolution, the quiet farmland of Midwood, Brooklyn found itself caught in the path of war. In 1776, British troops landed on Long Island and advanced inland toward the American defenses near Brooklyn. The surrounding region, including Midwood and nearby Flatbush, became a staging ground as soldiers moved through fields and along rural roads. Farms were disrupted, crops trampled, homes occupied, and supplies taken by passing armies. The nearby Battle of Long Island, one of the largest battles of the war, brought fighting dangerously close. While Midwood itself wasn't the main battlefield, it felt the full weight of occupation and uncertainty. For local families, daily life shifted from quiet agriculture to survival in a war zone, marking the first time this peaceful landscape was pulled into the forces of global conflict. By the 1800s, Midwood, Brooklyn was beginning a slow but important transition. What had long been open farmland in rural Flatbush started to feel the pull of a growing Brooklyn. New roads improved access, and by the mid to late 19th century, rail lines began connecting the area to more urban centers. This made it possible for people to live farther from the waterfront while still traveling into busier parts of the city. Wealthier families began building larger homes, using the area as a quiet retreat from denser neighborhoods. Even so, Midwood remained largely rural throughout much of the century. Fields still dominated the landscape, but the foundation had been set. Transportation and gradual development were quietly reshaping it from isolated farmland into a future residential neighborhood. Midwood, Brooklyn, began its transition from rural farmland to a more suburban landscape in the mid to late 1800s. But the shift really gained momentum in the late 19th century. As Brooklyn expanded and transportation improved, especially with the arrival of rail lines, people were able to live farther from crowded urban centers while still commuting into them. Large farms started to be subdivided, and detached homes began appearing along newly laid out streets. It wasn't an overnight change. Fields and open land still dominated, but the character of the area was clearly shifting. By the early 1900s, that slow transformation had accelerated, setting the stage for Midwood to become a fully developed residential neighborhood. Midwood, Brooklyn became fully urbanized in the early 20th century, roughly between 1900 and the 1930s. This is when the transformation accelerated. Farmland was rapidly subdivided. Streets were laid out in a grid, and rows of homes, apartment buildings, and local businesses began to fill in the landscape. A major driver was the expansion of subway lines, especially the BMT Brighton line, which made commuting into other parts of New York City fast and practical. With that connection in place, developers built at scale, attracting middle-class families looking for space, quiet, and access to the city. By the 1920s and 1930s, the open fields were largely gone. In their place stood a fully formed residential neighborhood, tree-lined streets, schools, synagogues, and shops, marking Midwood's shift from rural past to urban identity. In Midwood, Brooklyn, everyday life has long revolved around a few key commercial strips, rather than large centralized downtowns. The most important has been Avenue J, a lively, walkable corridor filled with bakeries, grocery stores, clothing shops, and small businesses. It became the neighborhood's main hub, where residents handled daily errands and ran into neighbors. Not far away, Kings Highway developed into a larger, busier shopping destination. With wider streets and more space, it attracted bigger stores, banks, and a wider variety of retail, drawing people from beyond Midwood itself. Another important strip is Coney Island Avenue, which has long served as a diverse commercial spine, lined with restaurants, specialty shops, and services reflecting the neighborhood's changing populations. Together, these areas form the backbone of Midwood's daily economy: local, practical, and community-centered rather than flashy, where most residents could find what they needed within walking distance. What makes Midwood, Brooklyn stand out in New York City isn't one flashy feature. It's the combination of calm, continuity, and strong identity in the middle of a fast-moving city. First, Midwood feels remarkably stable. While many NYC neighborhoods have gone through sharp cycles of boom, decline, and rapid gentrification, Midwood has changed more slowly. Streets lined with single-family homes and small apartment buildings have kept a consistent, lived-in feel over decades. Second, It has a deeply rooted community structure, especially within its large Orthodox Jewish population. Daily life is organized around schools, synagogues, and family routines. That creates a rhythm you don't see in most parts of the city. Shops closing early on Fridays, heavy foot traffic on Saturdays, and a strong sense that neighbors know each other. Third, Midwood is both connected and insulated. It sits right along major transit lines, making it easy to reach Manhattan or other parts of Brooklyn. But once you're inside the neighborhood, it feels quieter, almost suburban, compared to busier areas. And finally, it's practical rather than performative. There are no major tourist attractions, no scene. Commercial strips like Avenue J exist to serve residents, not visitors. Life here is about daily function. Schools, errands, family, not entertainment. That combination, steady change, strong community identity, and a low-key residential focus, is what makes Midwood feel different from much of New York City.